Our first speaker is Mr. Jake Shepherd. He is the director and co-founder of Synthesis Software Technologies. He's a qualified electrical engineer from WITS, qualified in 1990, intensely interested in many different areas from software engineering to philosophy to psychology to culture, and basically building systems both in terms of technologies, but also in terms of people. He also has an interest in the quirky like knives and Cape of Good Hope triangular stamps from 1853 to 1864. I felt that that was very important to mention. So having worked for Jake, however, I think his most important title is that of potential hero builder. He strives to see the potential in others and assist them in seeing it in themselves, which I think is often lacking these days. He understands the value of heroes, especially in this day and age, realizing that while we all need to be able to look up once in a while and be inspired, we also need to know that we can be our own heroes, that we can be those individuals we seek out to inspire us on a daily basis. Because it's only through nurturing potential and lifting it to great heights that we can, in essence, build a better self, a better family, a better company and community. And for me, I think Jake very much strives to inspire these values within his company and everybody that he meets. Jake, thank you very much for being here.
Yeah, right. How are we doing with the presentation? Managing to get it up? So we just wait for the presentation. Is it done? I mean, yeah. I don't know if my presentation's up there. I can see the echoing back. It reminds me of Benoit Mandelbrot, you know, the famous father of fractal geometry. It's Benoit B. Mandelbrot. And what does B stand for? He added it because it's to stand for Benoit B. Mandelbrot. And you get for the mathematicians, they'd be intrigued. Should I just start the talk or just a few minutes? Okay, great.
Okay.
Yeah, good. Yeah, that's the Benoit B. Mandelbrot image. Fractals are alive and well.
Curl around would have a lovely picture, but
yeah.
they're probably calculating it how it
All good. There we go. So we're here.
At least we've got your slides.
We've got my slides, which is great. So should we I think maybe just lower my voice a bit because it's echoing. That'll be great. Thanks. Okay, great. So, no, really good morning all. When Professor Hardy reached out to me and asked me to speak today, I felt two things. I felt honored and I felt excited. Honored because while I do really enjoy speaking, my wife constantly reminds me that, you know, as a director of Synthesis, everybody, the employees at Synthesis are paid to listen to me. So I'm really hoping today that no one here has been paid. Okay, so that, and then excited. Now I'm really a teacher at heart. Teaching is something that comes naturally to me. And I realized that some of the most important lessons that I've ever learned in life were never really taught to me. In fact, I only realized how important these lessons were in hindsight when looking back and examining my life. So I think we can go back a few slides. I think we've gone way too far. I don't know who's in charge of the slides, but so go back. I don't know if that's possible. There we go. There we go. So I think let's start there. So who's this bloke speaking to today? So now what I'll do is I'll just make I'll just say, oh, you're going to give me the clicker. Fantastic. Awesome. So who the hell am I? Actually, that's a good question because I think it's, which one do I do? There. Oh, there we go. Great. Okay. I'll try it out. So if I go back or forward, back. Oh, is there a delay? Is that the issue? So, yeah, I don't know if it is. Yeah, this is not, as far as I know. Oh, there we go. Unless it's already delayed. Okay, cool. So who the hell am I? And that's a good question. So let's start there. So my name, as Cherise said, is Jake Shepherd. Thanks. The identity crisis didn't quite hit this time. And I'm a director of Synthesis Software Technologies. We're really a software services company, and we employ over 150 different engineers, including data engineers and data scientists. And in 2017, we were acquired by Capital Appreciation. And Capital Appreciation is a JSE listed company. So in, by all measures, Synthesis is a real South African success story. However, all stories are best told from the beginning. Now, I was born in a little town called Brakpan, and Brakpan is way more famous for the jokes told about it than for its plenary speakers, let's be honest. And I'm a self-taught programmer. And what you're seeing here behind me is actually the start of my journey. I was lucky to be born into the age where home computers were starting. Home computers were something, if I'd been born slightly earlier, you could imagine that I would have been living in an era where mainframes and punch cards were what I'd need to do in order to get into software programming. But I was really lucky to be born into the age where home computers were coming into their own. And I was also very fortunate that I was born in a upper middle class environment where my parents could afford some of the indulgences that their kids wanted to do, And my brother and I had our own playroom loft, and in our loft we had a TV game, in those days Radofin. So some of the slides we saw earlier were the Radofin TV games. And the Radofin TV games, we would plug it into a TV, which was our own TV. My brother and I shared that TV upstairs in the playroom loft. And I'm a curious person by nature. And what that means is no one was surprised when I dismantled the entire thing, and I had a look at what on earth's going on here. It's really, I was intrigued. I think my parents were more surprised, and my brother was really relieved when I managed to put the entire thing back together again. Because I think without putting the entire thing back together again, he wouldn't have been able to have his favorite pastime, which is playing the thing. But at the end of the day, I was really disappointed. For me, I'd taken the thing apart to see how it worked, to see what I needed to do in order to get everything to work, and to actually make changes and make my own games, and I couldn't do that. But I think what happened then is the realization that the software bug had bitten. The software bug is something that has been with me for a long time. But fortunately, back then, in 1982, at the age of 14, I begged my father. I said to him, home computers are coming onto the market. Can't you just buy me one? And he said to me, let's have a look. And there were a number of home computers, and he said, let's go for the cheapest one. And the cheapest one was the Commodore VIC-20. And he said to me, it's very simple. That we need, I think it's a passing phase that you're going through. And therefore, I'm not going to spend way too much money on it. And so that's what he did. He got me the VIC-20 computer. And actually, one of the things I did is, well, in those days, there was no such thing as computer science, really. It was the early days in South Africa. And there was no internet, so you didn't go to YouTube to find out how things were done. So how did you teach yourself to program? So what you do is you go to the local CNA, you buy a magazine, and you page through it. Here's a program for my console, or my computer, home computer, and you type it in, and you get it to work. And then you open up what we had earlier on, you actually saw a picture of a VIC-20 manual. And in that manual, so you'd cross-reference, you'd actually say, well, here's my program. There's this thing that says for, go to the manual. What does for do? What does print do? What do all these things do? And you realize actually that that process of reverse engineering the program is what you use to learn. It's a great learning technique and teaching technique is a way to actually upskill. So that's how I learned to write Commodore Basic. But then I really became frustrated. I don't know if you've, in those days, with 3.5K of RAM, you've got a basic interpreter, your program ran so slowly, you could almost watch it drawing the pixels while your game was running. And I was frustrated, and I was just frustrated as all hell. So I said, no problem, something, do a bit of research and find out there's something called assembly language. So you teach yourself assembly language. Read a book on assembly language, teach yourself assembly language. And then you realize, oh, wait, I need a 16K expansion pack so I can load an assembler. And my father basically said, listen, the finances are tapped out. That's as much as you're getting, you make do. So, okay, not a problem. Teach yourself machine code. So you can imagine, just teach yourself machine code and start writing programs in machine code. And I can tell you, I was in awe at how fast my first machine code program actually ran on that little machine. And this was the beginning of a lifetime love affair with software. And my dad and I still joke, that we're still waiting for this phase of my life to end. I'm still in it. And then after school, I went off and did electrical engineering at Wits. And given my my obvious passion for software, it really was a passion. I often ask myself the question, well, why the hell did I do electrical engineering? And, in those days, you have to put yourself back in those days, and you realized, actually, computer science wasn't really a thing. Electrical engineering was a real profession, and it's going to a real profession. I think in hindsight, it was a really good decision because electrical engineering is a problem-solving degree, so you learn how to problem solve. And I think that's really something that I took out of it. But also, because I had so much passion for software, I could always teach myself software-related subjects. There's no ways I would have ever taught myself electrical engineering subjects. I just didn't have the passion for it. And I'd also thought at the time, listen, I don't want my hobby and my job to be the same thing. It turned out in the end of the day, my hobby and my job are exactly the same thing. So I've never really worked as an electrical engineer. I've only ever worked in software. Now, the first job I got was writing voicemail systems for a startup company. I learned quite a lot in that process, and I was there for about 2.5 years. But here's some advice for you. When you're working for a company and they don't pay your salary for 3 months, start to look for another job. Okay. The next job I got was at an engineering company, and we wrote quite a lot of software there for engineering and mining companies. The company was Hatch Africa, and I was actually at Hatch for 5 years. Learned a lot at Hatch. And while I was at Hatch, I was actually contacted by Dr. Jack Cohen. He was actually one of my lecturers at Wits. He hadn't really lectured me directly, but he had marked quite a lot of my software projects. So even though electrical engineering, is electrical engineering, we still had some software subjects. And, given my passion, whenever there was a software project, I just put in way more effort than the marks were worth. So, it's pretty easy in electrical engineering to be head and shoulders above all the other electrical engineers in software. Okay, and that's exactly what happened. So I was one of those standout people, and he remembered me from that. And he called me up and he says, listen, do I want to join him? And I said to him, no, I'm actually quite happy at Hatch. It's an international company. And then after a year of a lot of traveling, I was traveling to Zimbabwe, I was traveling to Namibia, I was traveling to Cape Town, I was traveling to Lime Acres, which is outside of Kimberley somewhere. And I was married, and I actually wanted to spend some time with my wife at home. So I've called him up and said, listen, is that opportunity still available? And he said to me, sure, opportunity's still there. So here's another lesson for life. Your work is often your best ambassador. So if I look back, that effort that I put into all those software projects while at university actually is the reason I'm standing in front of you today, which is an interesting thing to reflect on. So we decided to create a new company called Synthesis. Now, the name Synthesis, it symbolizes a seamless integration of many systems into a unified whole. And right from the beginning, we decided, let's focus on banking. Why banking? Well, what we did bring to banking was profound ignorance about banking. That's the one thing we brought. But I'd done a lot of work for engineering, mining companies, and I actually realized that they needed software, but they didn't want to pay for software. So we thought, well, banks, they're different. They need software, and they're prepared to pay for software. So that's a pretty good deal. And here's another lesson. Always do work for people who are prepared to pay you. Okay, so these are good life lessons. So in terms of, in those early years, what I did is my primary focus was really software. So Jack needed a software competence, and I came on board as that software competence. And really my focus was on software delivery. I was going to be the guy who delivered all the software, and I was actually going to be building a software development team within Synthesis. And that's what I've done for many, many years. And over these years, Synthesis has grown, and we've grown steadily and slowly. So just to give you an idea of that growth, the first 7 years, we were 7 people. The first 18 years, we were 35 people. So it's a real slow growth. I would say things changed about 5 years ago. And what happened about 5 years ago is we decided to really focus on emerging technology. And we decided to say, well, what is that next wave of technology that's going to come down the line? And we saw things like cloud. We saw things like blockchain, machine learning, AI, data streaming, containerization. These are all emerging technologies that if we could get there ahead of our clients would turn to us to ask us to help them on that journey. And that's exactly what happened. So if you actually look at the last 5 years, the number of people at Synthesis has grown almost 400%. And it's because of this getting ahead of the technology curve. So Charisse mentioned my title with 3 words. I'm sure you've heard of that geolocation system, what 3 words. So every single point on the map can be identified by 3 unique words within, 3 unique words are connected with a particular, let's say, 5 meter squared location within the world. And what I'd like, so an interesting concept is, well, where am I in life? Where have I arrived at? And maybe I can use 3 words to describe me and where I am. And so, as Professor Hardy pointed out, I really came up with these 3 words: potential, and then hero, and then builder. And what connected with me is those 3 words really resonate with me. They're really profound for me. What you can do is ask yourself what 3 words really resonate with you. And you could actually try and work from there as saying, well, A, it's a great way of, introducing yourself at parties. Now, here are my 3 words, and let me explain why. But B, it's a great way of coming up with a title. And the reason is I've always felt uncomfortable with my title at work. So many people introduce me as founder and director of Synthesis. And I've always said to them, listen, I'm uncomfortable with that title. And a lot of people introduce me as their boss. Boy, am I uncomfortable with that title. And the reason is because those sort of titles, let's say founder and director, are backward-looking titles. They're not aspirational, they're not forward-looking. When I came up with my 3 words, which is potential, hero, and builder, I realized that's my title. My title can come from these 3 words. The word potential is excess, right? We don't really need it because it's built into the word hero and it's built into the word builder. It's really there. So my title, and I'm quite happy to say, is Hero Builder, and it's a title that I really enjoy. And the reason I really enjoy this title of Hero Builder is because it's aspirational. It's looking forward in time. It's looking for what we can achieve. So let's get on to the critical skills. So, as a parent of 2 wonderful children, I've long reflected on what are the most important skills that we all need to have. Regardless of where our life journey takes us, are we there? Oh, that is fantastic. So, so regardless of where our life takes us, what are those 3 skills that we need in order to be successful? Well, it's just in time because I've actually finished the introduction. That's great. So now we all know why I'm here. It's really, I think, so why I'm here, I'm really here in my capacity as hero builder. You know, I'm seeing all of the people in front of me today and all the people, you know, virtually online as the future heroes of tomorrow. And so I'm addressing you. So what are those skills that we need to actually be these heroes? And I think today, I'm just going to get some water. Ah, there it is. Now, today, in this fast-paced world of ours, the technology-centered world, we basically need critical skills more than ever. So we're all aware of the 4th Industrial Revolution, and we're all aware of what this is doing to society at large. Now, human beings have 2 primary skills. You know, this is something that Noah Hariri actually pointed out in his book, Sapiens. He said we've got our arms and our legs, we've got our muscles, and then we've got our mind. We've got the creative aspect of ourselves. And the Industrial Revolution of the past really disintermediated our muscles, our arms and our legs. So you can imagine going back all the, you know, the steam train from a transport point of view, but like all those weaving machines, so, and all of the plowing machines. So really all the stuff that we're doing with our arms and our legs was disintermediated in the Industrial Revolution. What's happened now in this 4th Industrial Revolution, which I prefer to call the cognitive revolution, is we're actually disintermediating the mind. And all of us in the room are actually, in many respects, involved with that process. So from a synthesis point of view, we're involved, but many people in the AI ML space are also involved with this disintermediation of jobs that used to require our minds. So if you think about like companies that are producing cars that drive themselves, drivers are going to become irrelevant. You know, supermarket tellers are going to become irrelevant in their jobs. Many lawyers, doctors, these are all professions that are going to start falling by the wayside because machines can do that better than humans can. This is exciting, but it's also incredibly scary. And the reason it's scary is because the unknown is always incredibly scary, let's be honest. But where there's a threat, this is something I've learned in business, where there's a threat, there's always an opportunity. So let's look for those opportunities. And I'm saying that we need 3 skills in order to take advantage of these opportunities. And these are skills, if you actually go back, the skills that we're not taught at university. We're not taught at skills, which are really essential for our ability to pick up on these opportunities. And these are the skills that I think we all need to have. We need to have the skill of the lifelong learner, the human panado, and the master storyteller. Weird names, right? And these are the skills that not only my children need to have, and it's what I've actually been teaching them, but it's really what I want to discuss with you today. So the first thing is on the lifelong learner. So the next slide, thank you. So the lifelong learner, here's that old lady who's sitting there with her books and she is still learning. And I think we need to have that vision of ourselves, we're constantly learning. And in order to do that, we need the skill to learn new skills. And learning something new is actually quite hard. I don't know if you remember back, so if you go to the next slide, you'll see the soccer cards. If we go back and look at our, try and recall our earlier life as youngsters, learning to read was incredibly difficult. It's not a skill that comes naturally. And with our son, who had learning difficulties, he really didn't enjoy reading. It was not something that he wanted to do. But both my wife and I realized that he's a visual learner. He's not an audio learner. So we needed to teach him how to read. So how on earth do you get a young child to read? Well, he had a whole bunch of friends that loved soccer cards and collecting soccer cards. So we thought, great, we're going to bribe him. We bought packs and packs of soccer cards. And every time he read a sentence or a paragraph, or he finished his reader, he got soccer cards. And I can tell you, he had the best soccer card collection out of all of his friends, bar none. But more importantly, he had learned to read and love reading. And pretty soon he was actually reading far thicker books than I even read. And that was really impressive. So in terms of in terms of this whole concept of learning to read, we need to think that if you go to the next slide, we need to think that what is it that motivates us to want to learn to read or to learn any new skill? What are those soccer cards that we need to actually motivate ourselves? Maybe it's, pampering yourself with going out to a restaurant, whatever the story is. So maybe when you get to a milestone, like you've identified the next thing to learn and you've started learning, pamper yourself. And then you need the patience to learn new skills. Learning new skills is incredibly hard. And it's not good enough just to learn about it. You also have to practice it. So that's really important. And then the next thing you need to do is look out for the next skill to learn. And that's the whole concept of a lifelong learner. And one of the advantages we have in today's world is we've got the internet and we've got YouTube and we've got all these amazing online platforms. We actually have access to the best teachers in the world. We can take advantage of that and we can learn any skill that we apply our minds to. So if we go to the next slide, we'll see that, I'm sure all of you agree that lifelong learning is a great, it's a great skill to have. Ask yourself the question, let's try and get an understanding of whether we've got the skill of lifelong learning. How many skills have you taught yourself recently that wasn't part of a school or university syllabus? And how many of those skills have you mastered? Were you better than almost anybody else that you know? Maybe not the professionals in that field, but you're really better than most people. And if your answer is not a lot, well, then maybe you haven't got to the point of being a lifelong learner. So the next question is, well, that's all very well and good. We want to be a lifelong learner. And we've got this, let's say, you can almost ask yourself, well, what is that list of skills that I want to actually acquire in my life? What are those things that I think are desirable that I want to go for? The question is, which skills do you start with? So you've got this list, you've got this laundry list, this desire, I want to achieve this and this and this. But where do you start? Now, do I start with those things that are strengths and build on my strengths? Or do I say, oof, I'm terrible at difficult people interactions. Let me work on that weakness. Where do I start? And I want to say that actually there's a correct answer to this question, because really you'd think, well, let's work on both. And I think that's the wrong answer. And the correct answer is actually, I'd call it a developmental answer. At different points in your life, you need to focus on different areas. And at the beginning of your life, you actually have to focus on your strengths. Perfect slide, thank you. So what on earth is a strength? So strength is really a reinforcement of your natural talents. So there's certain things that you'll have that you just, like a talent that you naturally yearn to do. You just want to do it. You get a kick out of doing it. You seem to be able to learn it really, really quickly. Like you just enjoy it and you just sort of know how to do it. You pick up, you're just like a vacuum cleaner with all the knowledge about that. And then it just flows. Whatever you do, just like this is just effortless. And then you have glimpses of excellence. You basically surprise yourself. You say, wow, was that me? I can't believe I did that. And then the last thing is you have tremendous satisfaction. After doing that activity, you just can't wait to do it again. I remember with my kids at Disney World doing a fantastic ride. You just run up and want to do that ride again. That's what, now you know you've got a talent. And what you then have to do is actually work, as I said, work on these talents so that they can become strengths. There's a whole concept called strengths-based psychology. And what's quite interesting to work out is where it came from. Where does strengths-based psychology actually originate? And it came from a 1955 reading, it's a study in Nebraska, the Nebraska School Studies Council. And they ran reading, like basically trying to work out which methods of reading, teaching kids to read, is the most effective. And they actually had 3 different reading techniques, and basically they ran the study. What they found was something absolutely amazing, is irrespective of the technique, the average increase in reading ability went up 66%. So of those people who were average readers, they increased their word count from like 90 words per minute to 150 words per minute, and they could comprehend 50% of the information, which is quite amazing. What they found out afterwards, as an ad hoc finding after the study, was even more mind-blowing. And that is when they looked at those people who came in with an above average, like a really good reading skill, an innate reading skill, they increased over 800%. You know, it's mind-blowing. They went from like 350 words per minute to 2,900 words per minute. And I think what we can take from that is the tremendous benefits you get from investing in your strengths. It's like a massive, massive return on investment. And I think what we need to do is you always need to focus on your strengths early on in life so that you can actually have something of value to offer the world. You know, you want to do something that people are prepared to pay you for. So let's work on that. Let's actually get there, and let's actually do something of tremendous value. Those are your strengths. And you would think, all right, so, you know, perfect slide, thank you. Reading my mind, awesome. You'd think, well, I can just like ignore my weaknesses. You know, I've got my strengths, I'm focusing on my strengths, and I can just plaster over my weaknesses. You know, a doctor friend of mine, he told me that he's got an interesting way of dealing with staff. You know, sometimes he has really difficult staff encounters. And he calls in his wife because his wife is good with working with people. So he's not. So he pulls in his wife. She deals with all the difficult staff members. And then he continues. And that's really plastering over his weakness. And it's an effective strategy for now. But I think I think we can go to the next slide. Unless you focus on your weaknesses, it's going to trip you up. And the tripping you up is actually going to come on two fronts. It's going to come on an external front, and it's going to come on an internal front. So on the external front. Now, yes, we're plastering over. So what would be an example of, let's say, an introvert wouldn't be able to work effectively with crowds of people, or a thinking type person wouldn't be able to empathize really well with other people. And what we do, because we've got these weaknesses, what we do is we actually employ something called personas. We almost play a role, we act out. It's an acting role that we play, and we have various characters and scripted lines that we haul out for a particular situation. And what we find is over time, they work fairly well, those plasters that we put on, they work fairly well, but they don't work in every situation. And we start becoming tripped up in everyday situations because we've actually ignored all of our weaknesses. So you can think of myself. Now, I spent years honing my ability to craft complex computer systems. I really focused on software and things. And I really didn't focus on people. And all of a sudden I was landing up, I was in this company, I've got a software development team under me, and I need to now work with people. I need to build people. And I wasn't equipped. I can tell you now, sitting in front of a VIC-20, learning assembly language doesn't help you at all in one iota with working with a person who's really upset with you, okay? It just doesn't. So, you know, I had to actually work out, well, how do I strengthen this area? Because I'm not going to be able to grow this team unless I can work effectively and inspire people. So that's on an external front. But on an internal front, we also have a challenge when we ignore our weaknesses. And one way of trying to understand this is to realize that we actually live our life in answer to two fundamental questions. Everything we do in our life is in answer of two questions. The first part of our life, our life is in answer to the question is, what does the world want of me? You know, what does my parents want of me initially? What do my teachers want of me? What does my spouse want of me? What do my lecturers want of me? Or what do my children want of me? And we're living our life in answer to what does the world want of me? We marshal our resources and we try to plot our way forward. And then you hit what, called the midlife crisis. You hit this middle part of your life, the second half of life. And in the second half of life, you're confronted with a different question. And the different question you're confronted with is, what does my soul, what does my psyche want of me? And actually your soul or your psyche actually doesn't care about your strengths. It actually couldn't give a damn. And basically it often just says, it forces you to try and answer the question, what do I want to be, what do I need to become? What is my soul calling on me to be? Got nothing to do with my strengths. And might well be in an area of weakness. So for me, my area of weakness is working with people. But I actually had to answer the calling of my soul was, well, how do I build people? And that is something that we need to realize. This slide behind me here actually, I think, summarizes it brilliantly. Let's use a metaphor, in terms of strengths and weaknesses. And the metaphor is a soccer metaphor. If we look at our strengths as the forwards and the wings, that which we use to score goals on the soccer field, unless we have strengths, we're not going to be able to get ahead in life. And we might be able to have the best defense in the world, but the best we could ever hope for in life is then a 0-0 draw. That's not a particularly great thing to aspire to. But if you don't work on your weaknesses and you don't have your defenders and you don't have your goalies and your midfielders, you can often snatch defeat from the jaws of victory with all these own goals scored against yourself. So you actually have to mount a defense. So my advice to you in summary is very simple in terms of what to work on strengths and weaknesses. Initially work on strengths, plaster over the weaknesses. And then somewhere down the line in your career and in your life, you better well bloody focus on your weaknesses, because those are the things that are going to trip you up and they're going to prevent you from getting further. In terms of, just think, one thing I want to actually, in terms of this lifelong learning, I want you to reframe it as investing in yourself. Because actually, we invest in things and shares, etc. But how do you invest in yourself? So I think you invest in yourself by being a lifelong learner, by studying. And in order to do that, I suggest maybe here's a simple system that you can apply every day. Say to yourself, well, I'm going to read every single day. And I've been doing reading every single day for the last 20 odd years, 25 years, if I think back. And sometimes I'll get back home and I'll be absolutely exhausted. I just want to go to sleep. And I'll say, well, I haven't invested in myself today. Let me read one sentence. Maybe I should just invest one sentence in myself today. I was really fortunate 2 and a bit years ago, to actually meet one of my heroes. His name is Jordan Peterson. And Luke Mahowski is in the audience today. Luke. So he gave me a heads up. I asked him, what sort of questions should I ask Jordan Peterson? And I managed to get this amazing opportunity to ask him a question. And the question, Luke's question, was, what is it that if you had discovered maybe a technique or an idea earlier on in your career would have gotten you to where you are today faster? So we were asking, is there a shortcut to success? And he looked at me and he said, no, there isn't. And he said, the way you've got to understand it is actually quite simple. You've got to think of learning, and you've got to think of ideas and everything that you do in order to grow. You've got to think of it like a bank account. You're constantly investing, and then you have this compound interest that works in your bank account. So if you're constantly it's not that you can learn something that all of a sudden changes you. You constantly compound learning. Whatever you learn earlier on, and then you compound with more learning later on, all of a sudden comes together in this massive avalanche of real useful knowledge. And he says that's how you've got to look at knowledge, as this compound process of growth. And for me, that was really, really insightful. And that's what lifelong learning plays into. So the next question, which we can go in the next slide, is really what on earth, I think the next slide after this, what on earth is a human panado? Like, human panado is this really, really, so that picture of that little tablet there. What is panado? Well, it's a painkiller. So imagine you've got a headache, you've got a toothache, you take panado, right? It's going to make you feel better. So in the world of business, we also have pains. It's not easy. I would say, actually, if you look at people and they have a job, the reason they've got a job is they're prepared to do something that somebody else is not prepared to do. In other words, they're taking the headache away from somebody. Now, what's quite interesting is quite a few people have asked me, people that I work with, how is it that I can become indispensable? How can I become valuable? How can I actually, earn more? That's ultimately what it's down. They want to actually make sure that they, so is it KPIs? Are there some sort of key performance indicators that I can look to? And I actually say, I say to them, the answer is actually very simple. You can look at the next slide. The answer is actually very, very, very simple. Become a human panado. take the pain away from everybody else around you. Now, if you said to me, like, imagine, put yourself in my shoes, I'm trying to work out a person's salary. And I'm saying to myself, sure, if that person leaves, I've got a headache. I've got, there's all the stuff that they were carrying and all the stuff, amazing stuff that they were doing. I'm going to have that on my shoulders. So that makes them really more valuable. But also everybody wants to work with those people. Why? They're hungry. They want to do stuff. They take ownership of the projects. They lift everybody else up around them. They maybe crack a joke and lift everyone's spirits. These are really important things. And also, like, they're a source of positive energy. So I'm sure some of you might have read Harry Potter, and you have the Dementors, and then you can almost think of people in real life as being the Dementors. They come in, they suck all the life energy out of the room. Well, you want to be the opposite of that. You want to be the person who adds energy to the room. And that's what it means to be a human panado. So we can actually switch to the next slide. My question to you is, how do you picture leaders? What for you is a great leader? And so you might say to me, well, human panados, that's great for people who lower down on the chain in a company, but really the leaders are those take charge people that tell everyone what to do, and they set goals and they drive everybody. And I want to say, no, that's actually the wrong image. The right image is leaders as human panados. Robert Greenleaf in the 1970s published a very interesting article called The Servant as Leader. And in that article, he introduced the whole concept of servant leadership. How do leaders serve the people that they lead? And by doing that, they make their leadership something that is not oppressive, something that people enjoy being part of and actually enjoy being led. And in my experience, when I look back, I recognize the fact that these servant leaders are the human panados, of the leadership class within a company. And if I actually look at some of those characteristics and attributes, so on the next slide, some of them are things like what they do is they use persuasion a lot. And what I mean by persuasion is, as an example of this, I don't know if you've heard of a person from the 1720s or so called John Woolman. He was a Quaker in America. And in those days, slavery was a thing in America. And he used to go around, he realized from his biblical background and his, he was a bit of a pastor as well. And he really felt that slavery was wrong. It was an evil. And what he'd do is he'd go around telling people how evil slavery actually is. And he would persuade them, and he'd persuade them through questions. That's all he'd do, just ask questions. The most amazing thing is that by 1780, no Quakers owned slaves. One man persuaded everybody, not at the point of a gun, just by questions. All slaves that in terms of all, and this is 100 years before the American Civil War, which officially ended slavery, he had done it by just persuading people. The next area is to look at power and authority. What role does power and authority play in leadership? And you might think, well, what we have to do with power and authority is we need to use that power and authority to lead. So we need to have a coercive, force people to do stuff. So one way of being is overt coercion. So you start pulling rank. I'm your boss, and therefore you do it because I told you to do it this way. I mean, that's one way of leading. But another way is covert. It's manipulative. You try and manipulate people into doing the things the way you want to do it. Both of those have something in common, which is trying to get people to do stuff the way you want to do it. A far more effective approach is to actually say, no, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to provide people with opportunities to grow and let them choose the right path. And so effectively what that means is I'll persuade them, I'll use persuasion where they're doing things differently. And maybe their ideas are better than mine, so that's okay. I'll be open to that. But at the end of the day, that's how I'm going to actually get people to grow. And you've now created an incredibly resilient workforce who can make decisions on their own, who used to addressing and driving stuff on their own. That is way more valuable. The next thing you need as a leader is you need patience. Now, I've often had incredible people at Synthesis, and I've just put them into the wrong role. They've just been working in the wrong position. And if I just changed their role and they found their home, they would be incredibly successful. So patience is an important thing because you don't know necessarily what the exact right role is for every single person. And then you need empathy. You know, none of us is perfect. We all have a home life. We bring baggage from home into the office, and we actually take our office baggage and we take it home. And you need empathy because you need to realize that, you know, the person that you're seeing in front of you today that might be a bad actor, they're really coming from somewhere. There's an aspect of them we don't understand. And you just need a bit of empathy to realize that's why they're acting out. And if you have that, you take these opportunities, these difficult opportunities, and you can build those relationships instead of using those difficult situations as a breakdown in the relationships. And the last thing you want to do is you really want to encourage personal growth. You know, at Synthesis, the core concept of our culture is built around how do we build people. We want to create a culture that is a people-building culture as opposed to a people-using culture. And the way you do that is you just encourage personal growth at every turn. It's not that we say personal growth is something that happens outside of the work environment. It's very much bring it into the work environment and see how can we actually grow people personally. The last skill I want to really talk to is what is a master storyteller? Now, if you actually go to the next slide, you'll see this very nice painting. And I'm sure when we think about a storyteller, we have this picture of this elder sitting by the fireplace, you know, capturing his audience with this amazing story, bringing them along, and the audience is sitting at the edge of their seat, and they can't wait for the next twist and turn as the narrative unfolds. And I think that's one aspect of a storyteller. But I think a master storyteller realizes that absolutely everything is about stories. Everything in life is about stories. You know, I would say, you know, it's what makes us human is actually the story. And that's how important it is. So stories really, they have the power to build people and build society, and they also have the power to destroy. And really, a master storyteller understands that. So a master storyteller knows that there's a bad story. So what's a bad story? A bad story is a story that disempowers. So you might have a person who says, well, no one's prepared to give me a chance, and that's why I don't have a job today, is that I'm not given a break. But the problem with those stories is they disempower you. They take away your ability to actually make a difference and actually do things. And a good story has the opposite effect. It empowers you. And actually, so what you could say was, maybe I'm not presenting myself correctly, and I need to actually make a better first impression. So what are those skills I need in order to make a great first impression? And if I've got those skills, I'm going to get a job. You can see that empowers you. That's sort of a story. And I want to actually look at stories from three different areas, from three different angles. One area I want to look at is how the stories, so we can actually just, I think the next slide, that was really how the stories we tell ourselves impact on our own emotional state. The next thing I want to look at is how stories actually have the power to transform others. And lastly, I want to look at those stories that build nations. So one way, if we go to the next slide, so one way to understand this concept of how stories impact on our emotions is to understand that there's something called a path to action. So we see or hear something, we feel, and we act out. But before we feel, we actually tell ourselves a story. But that happens so quickly. It's almost, I mean, I suppose if you had to measure it, it'd maybe be nanoseconds. It's incredibly quick. We don't even realize we've told ourselves that story, but it's the story that is at the heart of what actually makes us feel. So what I want to, so I would say that, a master storyteller, as their core, let's say call it their core understanding, is that all we need to do is tell ourselves a different story. And as soon as we do that, and the ability to tell ourselves a different story, as soon as we do that, we now gain control of how we feel, and we then gain control of how we act out. So let's do a bit of let's paint a scene, okay? We can do one more slide. We paint a scene. You're walking down the street, okay, and you see a long-lost friend of yours, and you haven't seen them in years, and you're really, really excited to see them. And you can imagine that you wave, you wave and you shout out their name and you're so excited and they ignore you. How do you feel? Think about it. You're in this situation, so excited to see this person waving, and they're ignoring you. So I'll suggest a few. So maybe you feel hurt and upset. So why would you feel hurt and upset? Maybe even angry. Like, don't they know it's rude not to greet a person back who's greeted you? Maybe you feel embarrassed. Here I've gone, made a fool of myself on the street there, greeting somebody like I'm looking like a nut job, so I'm feeling embarrassed. Maybe I'm feeling guilty. I didn't call them when they got married. I didn't call them on the birth of their child. And maybe that's why they were hurt by the fact that I didn't reconnect. So I'm embarrassed. But look at those stories. All of those stories are telling you that the relationship is coming to an end. They're no longer a friend of yours. What happens if the story is different? What happens if they've just come from the doctor and they found out about their terminal cancer diagnosis? And they're trying to get their heads around what are they going to tell their spouse? How's the child going to live without them? So if now all of a sudden look at your emotions. Can you just feel those emotions? How the one set of stories created one set of emotions, and how this other story creates a totally different set of emotions. And as soon as you gain control of those emotions, you can choose how you act out. So a master storyteller knows a critical skill, and that's how to tell themselves different stories. And doesn't really matter if those other stories are true or not. Truth is actually not important. Just having a second story gives you control of your emotional state. Now, all of a sudden, you can choose how to act out. And that's incredibly powerful. In terms of, so we can go into the next one. So in terms of the stories we tell others. So in July last year, that was 2019, the rugby world in South Africa was shocked with the death of James Small from a heart attack, at the age of 50. So James Small was part of the 1995 Ellis Park, triumph that we had, where we won the World Cup. And that really inspired South Africa at a time when they needed inspiration. But what very few people know is that in 2009, James Small had tried to commit suicide. And after that, in order to escape media publicity, he ran off to his mom's home just to try and hide away from the public, from being in the public glare. And while he was at his mom, the phone rang, and his mother answered it. And the person at the other end of the line said, "It's the office of the president. And Mr. Mandela wanted to speak to James." So James actually says, "This is a prank call, just put it down. Put down the phone." And the phone rang again. It was the same person insisting, "Office of the president wants to speak to James Small." So James got onto the line suspiciously. And the president then said to him, "Hi, James, how are you?" Now, he wanted to know, is James, what's happening in your life? How did you get to this point? And James still didn't believe it was him, but after a minute or so, all of a sudden he realized, actually, this is Mr. Mandela on the phone. And he said, "Listen, I'm going through quite a few things in my life. One of the big issues is the fact that I'm out of the public light, the limelight. I've lost my purpose and my meaning. I don't know who I am anymore." And the president listened to him, and he said, "You know what? I know exactly what it feels like to feel that people have forgotten about you. That's exactly how I felt for 27 years in prison." So James swallowed hard. This is a life-changing perspective. How big were his problems really? His problems aren't that big. And Mr. Mandela then said to James, he said, "James, you've still got a big role to play, and you've got a responsibility. You're from the class of 95. You might think that people have forgotten about you. I know they haven't. And, you need to actually be that person who can inspire and lead the new generation. And you're still a hero to many people. and you need to stand up, and there's still so much for you to achieve, and actually that's your identity. No, so James actually said this was the moment that changed his entire life. The fact that the president could track him down, take time to actually just speak to him and actually just have an honest conversation with him and give him that perspective, that was life-changing. That is the power of Nelson Mandela. But it's also the power of a story. You know, certain stories can destroy, and you can imagine James Small's story of him having a meaningless life, not having anything to achieve, could well destroy him. But by Nelson Mandela speaking to him, he built him. So I think we all have a responsibility for the well-being of others. Now, our job is to hold up a mirror to other people. And in that mirror is how we see them, the potential that they have. And by showing them the potential that we see in them, we can transform their lives. And that's something that's really, really important, is the ability to actually be a master storyteller of telling other people stories that they can take on board and transform their lives. So one of the things that you could do for yourselves, if you look at the next slide, you could ask yourself, well, who in your family, your friends, is lost and depressed? What do those people mean to you? What do they do for you? And have you told them that that's what they mean to you and what they do for you? Have you told them how special they are? Have you held up that mirror to them? And I encourage you to do that, because that's something that we have to do as master storytellers, is build others. And lastly, let's look at the nation building stories. So, one of South Africa's, on the next slide, so one of South Africa's greatest master storytellers is the late Johnny Clegg. It's even in hindsight, when I look back, I think we don't fully appreciate the impact that he actually had on South Africa. Now, I was born into an apartheid South Africa, and I was told by the government and by society at large that we've all, like, coming from different cultures, we're all genetically different, and that's why we have to live apart. And actually, that was the future that was being painted for me. That was what I was being told was the case. That was what the facts on the ground were. And all of a sudden, you had one lone figure, by the, Johnny Clegg and his band Jaluka, that were actually talking about a totally different vision for South Africa. They were talking about, how there's the richness of the African culture. I still hear the words impi in my head, Impi, so that's Johnny Clegg for me. It's a richness of the African culture, a pride, who we are as a people and what we could achieve and what a future vision for South Africa could look like. Johnny Clegg once said, I don't want to be the great white hope, but I do want to give people hope, realistic hope. He said, black people don't need to be told about one man, one vote, and they don't have to be told how you need to be proud of your identity, your African identity. He said, but white people, especially young white people, do. I understand their fears and I understand their problems. There's a lot of paralysis to overcome. And what he wanted to do is just paint that future vision to help us overcome that paralysis. So that's the power of one man, the power of a master storyteller who weaved an imagined reality into existence. He told a story that was so powerful that it not only brought down a government, but at the same time, it painted a hopeful picture for the future. Not many people who can do that. And that's what we have to become. As master storytellers, that's something that we need to achieve. I think on the next slide, I've made a claim today that the critical skills of lifelong learner, human panado, and master storyteller are not taught. Yet, isn't that what I'm standing up here today doing? Aren't I teaching you these skills? But I'm sorry to tell you that most of you who've heard what I've said today are going to walk away from this talk unchanged. Part of it might be that I'm not a particularly good, motivator. But I think the real reason is as follows. The skills here that I'm talking about are caught, they're not taught. They're the sort of skills that have to touch the heart before they enter the mind. They're the skills that have to be experienced before they're appreciated. They're the skills that are far more art than science. And like any art, they're best learnt like an apprentice sitting at the feet of a master. And in that sense, South Africa is blessed. Now, for many years, we had the privilege of living with a giant, someone in whose footsteps we can follow, and that giant was Nelson Mandela. He was a lifelong learner who said education is the weapon that we can use to change the future. He was also a human panado. Everybody that ever knew or met Nelson Mandela came away feeling that they mattered, that they were important. He could just do that. And he was a master storyteller that inspired, with his vision of a rainbow South Africa, a new, brighter future. So my challenge to you is as follows. It's to be changed. Changed by the learning that you embrace, changed by the people that you uplift and those that uplift you, and changed by the stories that you weave. The skills you need to navigate the future are actually in your grasp. All you need to do is follow in the footsteps of giants. Become a lifelong learner. Look out for opportunities to take pain away from others and to be that human panado. And lastly, to master the stories that create greatness. Thank you. Yeah, thanks.
Carol, I think there are a few questions.
Yeah, great.
Firstly, I'd just like to ask, are there any questions from the audience?
So we have one from the online audience.
Yes.
So Rohit was wanting to find out, from where should we gather these stories, especially if we ourselves are down at some point in our time in life?
These stories actually, we hear them all the time. I think what we don't do, and we see them all the time, what we don't do is recognize them. I think if we look, so where did I find the James Small story? Well, somebody said, well, did you see this on News 24? When Rugby posted this about James Small. And when I read that, I was inspired. I couldn't believe it. And for me, that then became a story. But I think actually in life, we see stories around us all the time. And it's to frame those as, well, wait a minute, that's an amazing story. And then actually write it down and keep it. Have it as something that we can use to inspire ourselves. I prepare on a weekly, every 2 weeks, I prepare for a radio talk. And I talk about just different topics that just whatever I'm thinking about at the time. And every single time I have to think about, well, what anecdote can I include? And inevitably, there's an anecdote that I can use for every single message. And where does the anecdote come from? Just thinking about it, just appreciating everything that's happened in your life, and just actually saying, oh, wow, there's a story. That actually explains this really well. In terms of the Jordan Peterson anecdotes, that happened to me, but I hadn't actually thought about it for a long time. And Luke said he was going to be joining us today in person. And I remembered, well, yeah, that Luke played a role in that story. And that triggered my mind to say, the Jordan Peterson one is a great way of giving over why lifelong learning is so important. I think it's just reflecting on life and just taking a bit of a pause and actually thinking about just creating enough of a space in life to think about the important stuff. And I think if you do that and you make that a mission of yours, you'll find the stories.
Okay, I've got a couple more questions online. Maybe, did you want to go first? So an in-venue question first.
So Jake, I'm going to put you on the spot. Of that story that you think can help allay those fears. Practice this, you
Look, I think the first thing you got to do, so Luke asked the question, in terms of what's the beginning of the story of AI and how the fears that it invokes, the threats that it creates. I think what we need to do is realize that you need perspective and realize that throughout history, humanity has been faced with threats. we don't always know how we're going to overcome them. So today you might think more and more, well, is global warming and what's going to happen there? And we don't know, it's a catastrophe. And I think what we need to do is just have a bit of faith in humanity, have a bit of faith in the future, have a bit of faith in the people in front of us and the potential that we have in the world. And just basically say, you know, if the problem is we're given enough notice in time, which we are given quite a lot of notice, we can see where things are going. It's like a slow-moving train wreck, let's call it that. We have this train wreck, we're scared about it, but it's a slow-moving train wreck. Have faith that humanity can solve that train wreck. They can solve for it. And I think that's really my message to you, is just, yes, it's scary, you know, this whole change in the scope. It may be amazing things are going to happen. We don't really understand what they are. It might be that actually we just lift ourselves to that next level when we paired with AI, and we find tremendous solutions that we're not looking at right now. So I think the way you combat, I would say the way I combat the fear of the unknown is by having a belief in the future potential of everybody. And if you have a firm belief in that, I think can actually address those fears, realistic fears.
Okay, we've got on the Q&A window from the platform, Afra is asking, personal growth means different things to different people. What is your definition of personal growth?
Okay, so I think if you think about life, we operate at a conscious level and we operate at an unconscious level. We have two levels. And if I had to like compare the two, I would say your conscious mind is like this tiny little raft floating on this massive, unruly ocean that is the unconscious. It's dwarfed. Our conscious mind is dwarfed by the unconscious. So personal growth for me is actually making the unconscious conscious. It's how do we take those things, maybe it's the stories that we've always told ourselves that have paralyzed us or prevented us from taking that next step. How do we make those stories conscious? Recognize, oh, that's the story I've been telling myself since I was young. I'm not clever enough. I'm not resilient enough. I can't achieve that. And recognize those stories. They're unconscious. A lot of the time we don't even know that those stories are there. But if we make them conscious, we grow. So for me, growth and personal growth is about taking so much of our life, which is unconscious, and revealing it, recognizing it, being open to what it might be, and to recognize, oh, actually, that's not necessarily true. It's a long-held belief. And some of these beliefs are really old. I mean, they're family beliefs that have almost been handed down from generation to generation. And I think what we need to do is be brave enough to say, let's live a fully conscious life. Let's try and take much of the stuff that's unconscious and make it conscious. And I think by doing that, you grow. And that's what really growth is about.
Mitchell Kyle is asking, given that in the next 5 years, most industries are building up sort of machine learning and streaming pipelines, containerization and cloud being the now technology, what do you think the next 5 years will look like?
Oh, crystal ball. Yes, it is a motivational talk. So let me talk about the process before I try and take a stab. I need a bit of time to take a stab at that. I think, I often see myself as, and see synthesis as a surfer. You can imagine on your surfboard and you're on the waves and you've got these massive ocean swells. So if you look out to the ocean, you see these swells that are happening out there. And you as a surfer are trying to predict which swell is going to turn into a wave. And you're trying to position yourself and paddle to the point where the wave's going to happen. And a lot of what we do in the industry, in the technical industry, is look out onto this ocean of swells and trying to predict that future wave. I think the one thing that's starting to happen is quantum computing. I think quantum computing, the whole concept of qubits and actually processing information essentially in parallel is going to be a game changer. And I don't think we fully recognize exactly how it's going to be a game changer. almost having unlimited computing power. I think that's the one area. I think if you look at what Elon Musk is doing with Neuralink, the whole concept of planting a chip in somebody's mind is the beginning of, let's call it, up until now, the universe has only ever seen biological life. And we're living in the generation, and you guys are involved with that, let's call it that nexus, that point in time where we're giving birth to the first non-biological life, inorganic life in terms of computers and AI. And when you're living at this nexus, we then also saying, well, how do we merge these two? How do we take the abilities or our biological existence, and how do we merge that with the inorganic world of compute and massive storage? And Neuralink is the beginning of that. So I think there's going to be some massive stuff that's going to come from there. I think another area which for me is fascinating is humanity's always been limited by resources, and we've fought wars over different resources. And I think with our venturing into space, and again, Elon Musk is playing a leading role here, there's a potential to start mining asteroids and actually not having a limitation on material resources anymore. There's infinitely more material in space than there is on Earth. So, and what you could achieve by that. And then if you're looking at things like nanotechnology and automated manufacture at a nano level, and building our next generation of space arcs, etc., in an automated way using nanorobots, I think there's just so much stuff on the horizon. And as a surfer, we're just trying to look out there and say, all right, how do we position ourselves for the next wave and try and guess at what the next wave is?
Okay, and one last question before we let you enjoy the tea break. Kisisa is asking, if I'm close to 40, is it possible to turn over a new leaf? Which I guess is applicable to all of us in our midlife. So
if we're close to 40, life begins at 40.
So some of us are beyond 40, so maybe apply the same question to the older.
So I can honestly say that, these very real weaknesses that I've had, people weaknesses, inability to work effectively and inspire others, was a very real problem. And I woke up one day recognizing the fact that, I told you about capital appreciation, purchasing synthesis. And up until then, I never really worried about the future because, private company, you've got to do whatever you need to do because you are the company. And all of a sudden, for the first time, the possibility, it's not that I want to leave synthesis or capital appreciation, I don't want to give you the wrong idea, but the first time in 20 odd years, the thought hit me that there could be an after. And then what is it that I want to do with my life? And that second life questions, what does my soul want of me? What does my psyche want of me? Because I delayed answering and asking that question for so long, it hit me like a ton of bricks. I was floored. I won't say I was depressed because I think it's a clinical condition, but I was in a funk. And I had to actually dig deep. I had to actually ask those people closest to me, my wife, my daughter, and my son. And I said to them, what is it that you think I could be? Here I am. I've been in the software industry for so long, but I'm asking my kids and my wife, what is it you think that I could be? And they said to me, when you work with people and you grow people, you're energized. You have a sparkle in your eyes. We seem to think that that's what your soul is craving for. And I think that they were right. What I then realized actually is, therefore, how do I now center my life around a future where I start building people? And then I was hit by the next question. Well, if it's good enough for the future, why isn't it good enough for right now? And that's exactly what happened, is I said, all right, great. I've got this massive opportunity actually at Synthesis to build people, to build a culture. And let's grab that opportunity. Yes, the assembly language didn't help me. So what I've got to do is I actually then started learning about psychology, learning about culture, and actually going on a journey, learning and trying to address my weaknesses from the past. And actually, I would say, thinking back, it's been the most fruitful and the most inspiring part of my life. You know, if I look at speaking to you guys today, which I've really enjoyed, 3 years ago, I couldn't stand up in front of an audience, no matter how small, and speak. I was petrified of speaking, absolutely petrified. I remember 3 years ago trying to do a short 2-minute introduction, and I actually broke down and I was practicing in front of my wife and my daughter, and I broke down in a nervous sweat. I couldn't get the words out, and I didn't. And that was 3 years ago. And today, I was actually invited to be a guest speaker at Toastmasters. I said was one of my employees, and he said, please speak at Toastmasters. I said, you've got to be mad. I can't speak to people. It's not something I do. And he says, no, Jake, you'll be fine. I mean, he believed in me. I certainly didn't believe in myself. And I actually did an okay job. And I actually surprised myself. And that actually was the beginning of a journey where I started giving talks for, let's say, synthesis at some of our charities. And then actually somebody saw one of my talks and said, well, why don't you come into the radio and talk about that? And now all of a sudden, like I think I've gone to the radio about 25 times over the last 2 years. So now I talk, actually, and I actually enjoy it. So, and that all happened after 40. So my suggestion is life actually begins after 40. And there's tremendous stuff that you can achieve. And I would say some of the greatest things that you can achieve actually in life are the things that might have historically been your weaknesses, and they're the things that you start focusing on in your second half of life.
Okay, we had one more follow-up question, but I guess we're a bit pressed for time now, so maybe we can answer, Rohit, your follow-up question online in a moment. But I'll hand back to Charisse now to thank Jake again.
Thank you very much, Jake. I think you need to be an incredibly good motivational speaker to be able to motivate people across Zoom. So I think this is definitely a job well done. We're going to take a short tea break now, since we're